Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of UnMasked, podcast where we talk about all things mental health. Today we have a very, very special guest. We have heavy metal guitarist JD McGibney from Angels in the Battlefield. How are you today, man?
I'm doing good, Brody. How are you?
I'm not bad, just enjoying this SoCal weather.
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful day today. It's like summer is here, but it's like a slow introduction. It's not that, 1 week a year where we get like 90-degree weather and you feel like you're in a frying pan.
Yeah, I can agree with that. It's also one of those days where, like, if you are having a shitty day, you can just literally just step outside for 5 minutes and or instantly feeling much better.
Get that mental reset. Or if you're close enough, go to the beach.
I mean, before we get started into, you've got a pretty, extensive career. You've done some really cool things, but give us the, 30-second pitch on who is JD?
Oh, man, who am I? It's always like a weird question for me, despite being like a performer, being like, a guitar player and always like being on stage. The spotlight's put on me like that. I always feel like shy is like the best way for me to like describe it, because it's like, I'm just me. I'm just a regular guy from Long Island, New York. Picked up guitar when he was a teenager and used that to help kind of deal with what I later came to identify as anxiety, and turn music into a career by playing on stage, doing session work, touring, enjoying myself. And I also really like pizza.
Well, it's kind of hard to find decent pizza out here in California.
Yeah, it is. When I moved out here originally, within like a month, I was like, oh man, I might have made a terrible mistake because I just couldn't find any good pizza.
There's a place in West Hollywood called Vito's Pizza, and it's the closest I've ever found to New York style pizza.
I'm wondering if it's the same, if it's like a chain, because there's a Vito's in Santa Monica,
Huh.
that is like this close to being like New York pizza. Like you walk in, like even like the place has like the aesthetic of like, oh, I just walked into a pizzeria in like Brooklyn.
I have to go check that one out, I think. But yeah, now I'm getting kind of hungry. Let's talk about your history with anxiety. When was probably your earliest memory of when you started to realize like there is something different about the way that I feel?
I think that is a difficult question to answer, because I didn't realize that anxiety was a thing that I dealt with until I was like 29 or 30. And like a really good friend of mine was just like, you're everything that you're saying and you're doing, like, because I just went off on like an anxiety loop, and it was like a tangent. He's like, that's all anxiety talking, buddy. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he kind of just, educated me a little bit, because he is a little bit more versed in mental health and psychology. And I ended up realizing, oh, this is something that I literally have just been dealing with like my entire life. Because I can just recall as far back as being like just a little kid, like 3, 4, 5 years old, like my earliest memories, and just always having this sense of worry that was just always there. And by the time I got into like adolescence, I was a teenager starting to like figure out who I was. You have like your normal like confrontations with your parents, because you're like, oh, I don't agree with this. I believe this way, and you have like that butting of heads. At the same time, that little voice of worry kind of just built up into this impending sense of doom that was just always there in the back of my head. And basically since I was like a teenager until like even now, like sometimes it just turns into a really loud voice that like makes me question my abilities, or question my motivations, or like question everything. And I always just have this fear of like something's always about to go wrong for some reason or another.
It's kind of like you're always in this mentality of like, worst case scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. And I could just be, sitting down and like not have any like real like triggers, but like there's always like stuff in the back of my mind where I'm like, I have to think about this. I have to worry about this.
Did you think about, were there any particular things that triggered these types of, these types of thoughts or these types of mood spirals that you went in?
There are definitely things that are like consistent triggers for me. Growing up, I wasn't exactly the healthiest environment to be growing up in. So something that has continued is, even to like now, is like any kind of like yelling or any kind of like potential for confrontation, whether it's, verbal or like physical. Like I automatically have this reaction to tense up and just fear. Like even if someone seems like they're disappointed, I automatically have that sense of like, oh, there's going to be yelling, or oh, like what's going to be happening. And like it could just be like somebody dropped a plate. Like my instinct is to just have that sense of fear, like something's going to go wrong. And it took me a really long time, and like not until I was an adult, to realize, oh, this is not a normal reaction. Like, yeah, you're going to get startled, like if something happens out of nowhere. Anybody is. But to have that like severe, fight or flight reaction, I recognize was not healthy.
Did it just affect you mentally, or was it like, did it have effect on your body as well, like physically?
I actually, when I realized that anxiety was like just generalized anxiety was something that I was struggling with and dealing with on a daily basis, I went and started doing research, and I actually went and started seeing a therapist for the first time in my life about a year and a half ago. But I ended up coming across a book called Unwinding Anxiety, which helped me a lot. And anyone that is listening that is dealing with anxiety themselves, I highly recommend the book. But one of the things that the author points out is that one of the big things that he teaches his clients, or the people who he's helping, is that they should practice mindfulness. And one of the things that he points out is to focus on their physical feelings in the moment when they noticed, oh, this is an anxiety loop. And for me, I noticed that a lot of times when I was getting anxious, or like I let that little anxiety voice take control, I always felt warm, like I was comfortable. Like it wasn't like, oh, it's really hot, I got to turn down the thermostat. The best way I've been able to describe it, it felt like I was being microwaved, where like I was fine, but at the same time I was really, really like warm and like uncomfortable, and I always felt tense. Like my muscles would ache. Like I would have a neck issue like a lot. Like something I noticed is that like my eye will twitch. Like if I'm just really, really stressed, like my eye will twitch and I can't control it. So like those are the physical symptoms. Like my foot will twitch a lot. I bite my nails. Those are the kind of physical representations of how my anxiety comes out.
It's not the first time I've heard symptoms like that. I've heard everything from biting your nails, the foot twitch, the eye twitch, to people that just could physically just lock up. They can't move. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, it's crazy what the human mind can do and have such strong effects on like the body. One of the biggest things that convinced me to go and seek professional help from a therapist was the fact that like I just always was tired. I wasn't sleeping well, and if I'm being completely honest, from the time I was maybe like 14, 15 years old, so I was like beginning of high school, middle of high school, till year or 2 years ago when I started going to see like an actual therapist, I just hadn't slept properly. Like if I dreamed and remembered a dream, like it threw me off because I just never like slept properly. Like I just always have this I just always would wake up regularly, and I would be aware that I was waking up most of the time, because I would wake up to like, I'd have to pee, or I would just wake up and have like this sense of like worry over something that was just like bothering me, or like this sense of dread over this task that I had to do that was coming up the next day, or something that had like some sort of time sensitivity to it. And I wasn't sleeping for 2 decades, basically.
You're talking about these thoughts of dread, like you have a task you have to do, you have an upcoming show, like what specifically were those thoughts in your head? Like, is it that, that thought of, I'm going to fail at this task, or this show is going to completely suck? Like, what were you thinking in those moments?
Most of them had like a similar thought process or like a pattern. And for me, it was always just questioning my ability. Like, I just never felt that I was able to do anything. I never felt like I was capable. So let's say like I have to go on, like, everyone has to do their taxes every year, right? Like, I was always afraid of like filing my taxes because I was like, oh man, I'm probably just gonna like mess up something. I'm gonna forget a piece of paper. I'm gonna forget a document, or someone's gonna look at my financial statement and like, since they're an accountant, they probably have like really successful clientele. They're gonna see that I'm a musician, and they're gonna be like, oh, this guy is like a loser, stuff like that, and like stuff that made no sense and had no grounding in reality. It was just my own anxiety taking control and like leading me down a path without any data. One thing that I struggle with even to this day, being a musician, I'm an artist, and I think I am terrible at my instrument. I love playing. I love writing music. I love playing music. I get paid to play music. But at the end of the day, because of the anxiety, I am extremely self-critical, and I just think that no matter what I do isn't good.
It's interesting because you've had a pretty successful career. Like, you've done some awesome stuff. The fact that your mind can actually tell you, hey, what you're doing right now, you suck. Like, you're not good. Like, that to me it just blows my mind.
I know, and it's. I honestly think me not being aware of what I was actually dealing with dealing with anxiety and letting that train of thought basically go off on its own without using logic, I think it's hindered my ability to go even further. One of the oldest sayings is you're always going to be your worst critic, and that's true. Like, I have experienced that ever since I picked up guitar. Like, I love it. It's great. Music has always been a source of comfort for me. It's been a way for me to express myself. It's been a way for me to healthily vent and then come back and analyze my feelings. But I just think that I could always be better. Or I'll listen to someone that I look up to and be like, oh man, I really admire that guitar player. They're phenomenal. I am nowhere near as good as them. And there's that sense of comparing myself to other people, which is, again, something that is common with people who deal with anxiety. And if you go down that path, it can lead down to a path of, say, depression or like other things that are linked to anxiety.
Just so you bring that up, because one of the reasons I started this podcast was Chester Bennington. Reading his story and the fact that he inspired millions of people, but still every day just couldn't escape his own demons, which eventually consumed him. It's just such. It's not just a sad story, but like, it's so common across a lot of musicians, a lot of artists. It's they put everything they have into their music, into their art, but it still doesn't help them with what they're going through in their head.
Yeah, and it's I very much appreciate the fact that you have a podcast like this where you're encouraging people to share their stories and share what they're going through. And I think a big reason why people suffer so much, even when we look at celebrities, someone like Chester Bennington or someone like Robin Williams or Chris Cornell, is because we can see these people and be like, they're extremely successful. Like, look at them. They're rich, they're wealthy, they're millionaires. People love them. They have gold records. They have Oscars. They have like top hit after top hit. But like, there's still something that they're missing on the inside, or something that they can't process, or something that they can't get over emotionally. And the stigma around talking about what you're feeling in society is still very much a thing. It's definitely a lot less than the past like 10, 15, 20 years. But I do think that having these conversations openly and encouraging people to like talk about when they are feeling down or when they are struggling with something, it helps alleviate at least the symptom of feeling isolated, which I think is probably just talking from like own personal experience, like it helps alleviate a lot just knowing that you can talk to somebody, or somebody else understands what you're going through, and it's not just, oh, I'm broken, I don't deserve this, or I don't deserve to be around people, or I don't deserve happiness because I'm different. Everyone struggles with something at some point. So I think I very much appreciate what it is that you are doing.
I appreciate
with this podcast.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the, you bring up so many interesting points, but one thing I do want to talk about is the fact that we are trying to get people, especially young men, to talk about this, to talk about mental health, to talk about depression, because a majority of the suicide rate is men. And we've been doing a lot of work with the NFL Players Association lately, with a couple of the NCAA college football teams, and a lot of these organizations now are pushing this agenda where they can actually remove the stigma of it's okay to talk about depression, it's okay to talk about anxiety, it's okay to talk about when you're feeling like shit. We got to remove that this stigma that if you reach out and want to speak to a friend or speak to anybody, you're less of a man for doing so.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I very much appreciate. I like the fact that a lot of these bigger companies, these bigger organizations, are making that change, and they're implementing the education to younger and younger people. This way, we can make that change, and we can teach the next generation, the next group of people that are coming up, that, hey, it's okay to talk about this. This is what happened with all these other generations prior who were not having these talks. And it's interesting too, because so many people now, I think, are starting to see the value in opening up and sharing. And I think it's also interesting to see the dynamic of watching someone encourage somebody else to open up and talk and share about what they're going through, and then helping them kind of overcome something, and then they themselves feel uncomfortable opening up. And I can say that I am definitely one of those people where most of my entire life, because my anxiety made me feel like I didn't have value, one of my coping mechanisms was to go out of my way to help other people and to help them, conquer their battlefield. But I myself didn't open up. I almost rarely talked to anybody if I was going through something difficult. It's only until recently where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to be vocal. I don't feel good today. And I'll talk to people I love, people who are my friends, my family, or even on social media. I'll be like, today is a difficult day. And I didn't used to do that because I always felt like I didn't have value as a person. So if I have these negative feelings and share that with people, my value will go down. When in truth, we're all people. We all have emotions. We all have ups. We all have downs, different varying degrees depending on who you are. But it's okay to express how you feel.
That's the interesting thing about depression and anxiety is it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care that you're a rock star. It doesn't care that you're an NBA player. It doesn't care if you're a barista at Starbucks. It affects everybody. Everybody's got their own unique story, the way that it affects them. But depression and anxiety, it can and will happen to most people in one way or the other.
It's really difficult to begin with to work with an individual on helping them because it is so individualized from person to person. You have symptoms which are going to be generalized that you can identify things, across the board. You can look at someone and be like, oh, you might have this, or look at somebody else and be like, oh, you might have that. But helping that individual person is very tailored to what they specifically need, and whether it's a biological thing or whether it's something that's due to trauma.
When someone actually reaches out to you and say, hey, I need to tell you that I'm feeling like shit, I'm depressed, I'm anxious about this. In my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes you just have to be that friend that listens. Don't offer advice, don't say go to therapy, don't go for a walk outside, go to the gym. Just sometimes it just takes a friend just to listen to you for 10 minutes and just so you can basically relieve that burden.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I think is being educated to, us as a whole in society more, is like doing just that. Like sometimes you just need to listen. Like you don't need to fix anybody. You don't need to have the answers. Sometimes people just want to talk. Sometimes people just need to vent, like you just said.
So prior to you going to therapy, speaking to a therapist, did you ever open up to any of your friends or your family about what you were going through?
Very, very rarely. From a very young age, I kind of like started distancing myself emotionally from, say, like most of my family. It wasn't until like I was an adult that I started building deeper relationships with like specific individuals. And, at this moment, I do have people in my family that I do feel comfortable opening up to and like talking with. And in general, I have become more comfortable just sharing how it is that I'm feeling. And as a kid, there were maybe like some friends, like one or two at a time, maybe had a little bit of a wedge placed between me and most of my family members, because I didn't feel comfortable with most of the people in my family. And then also I didn't really open up to a lot of friends all that much. I was more of the strong friend who was there to like listen to people and like go out of my way to help people. There were like some individuals, like one or two people at a time, that I felt opening up to sometimes, but only if it was like really bad with something that I just didn't know what to do. And I would just, I wouldn't do it in a healthy manner. I would kind of just like vent to them and go in like an anxiety loop and just go around in circles with the conversation, just analyzing and like over-analyzing things without having any data. And I would just go down like an anxiety loop. But now, after going to therapy and after kind of realizing what was going on, what it was that I was dealing with, I have developed stronger relationships with family members and with friends. And just in general, I've started to just open up and be honest. Like, again, if I'm not having a good day, I'm just going to, let people know. I'm not going to be like, oh, yeah, no, I'm fine, I'm good. Or like even on social media, I've made it a point to have that conversation in an open platform, because I think the more that we in general just accept, okay, I'm having a bad day, it's all good. I'm still a human being. I can do what I have to do, but I'm going to make sure that I give myself some time to decompress and, gather myself, because 3 decades of learned anxiety behavior takes a really long time to, unlearn and like build new habits.
So let's talk about your day to day. So you say your anxiety creeps in when you're have a task that's due, or like, you're doing something throughout the day. What about those moments where you're performing, you're on stage? Does it creep in there? Is it in the back of your head, or is that your escape from it?
Music is my escape. If I'm up on stage, it's weird to explain to people who've never been on stage, but anyone else that I've talked to that's been on stage or been a performer, like they get it when I say, like, I step on stage and like a switch clicks and I'm a different personality, but I'm still me. Like, it's just another part of me, and like I just go, and whatever's going on in the show, whatever energy I have from like any kind of emotions, whether it's good or bad, is just focused into the performance and like whatever is the essence of the art being presented. So I've never had anxiety the way that I normally feel it when I'm up on stage performing. Obviously you're on stage, shit happens and like something breaks, or like you jump off and it's like, oh, I just disconnected my wireless. Oh, I got to fix it. All right. Anxiety is gone. Yeah. It's fixed. Keep going. But like there is never that sense of impending doom that like I've described earlier.
Kevin Love from the Cleveland Cavaliers back in 2017, he had a anxiety attack when he was actually on the basketball court during a game, and he left the court. The public perception, and even some of his teammates publicly called him out because they didn't know what was going on. They just assumed that he was being weak, and he just went to the locker room and didn't come back out. But the public perception, that they were kind of brutal on him. They were like, he has no backbone. Like, he is not the superstar that people think he is. Like, why is he earning that kind of money when he can't even come back out on the court? They didn't realize that at that time, like he described it as his world was crashing down around him. He couldn't breathe when they went to the locker room. He couldn't get off the floor. And it's, again, it comes back to this stigma. Like, you don't know what people are going through. For like, high profile performance such as yourself, and guys like Kevin Love, like being up on stage, like it can be a pretty daunting experience.
Oh, 100%. And it's stuff like that where it's like it makes one afraid to open up. And again, speaking from personal experience, having that kind of reaction to a moment of quote unquote weakness, it's like, why would I open up? But the truth is, it's like, the majority of people are not educated on mental health, or they're not educated on like, something might be going on. They're not trained from like a child to think of like, maybe I should look at this from like that person's perspective for like 2 seconds, just to be like, maybe something's going on. And you get that kind of reaction, and breaking that thought process and like the way we educate like ourselves and our kids is it's difficult, but like we're literally fighting that reaction.
Yeah. Can you recall what is probably your worst moment you can think of with your anxiety? Like, what was your rock bottom with it?
Oh man, without getting into too much detail, like I mentioned earlier, my anxiety basically led me down a path of just not seeing value in myself as a person unless I was going out of my way to help other people. And that led me to go basically sacrifice my own physical and mental well-being to help others in order to make me feel good about myself. But obviously that doesn't work, so I just kept doing it. And like the situations got more and more severe. And it even led to me having that mentality going into romantic relationships. So the short version is that I ended up in a severely emotionally abusive relationship with a woman that I thought needed help, and I had to do it in order to help her. Just kept going down like a path of like, she wanted me to do things that I wasn't comfortable with, but I felt like I had anxiety attacks and give myself value. And, I just constantly was having like anxiety. It's really hard to even just like put into words like how it felt, because I was just always tense. I didn't think anything I was doing was ever good enough. Again, like I said, she was like emotionally abusive on top of making me do things. Or I chose to do things because of how I was thinking, because you can never physically make somebody do something that they don't want to do. That whole situation was probably my rock bottom. And when I left the relationship, it left me with a lot of baggage and a lot of stewing around in what happened and trying to make sense of what really happened. And I think that relationship is a big catalyst for the course of action that I've chosen for my career and my life now, having been able to work through a lot of it. So one of the reasons why I'm so vocal about mental health is because I've seen firsthand what it's like when someone has like severe mental illness, and it's heartbreaking, especially when it's someone that you love. And I myself have dealt with mental illness, and though I don't think it is anywhere near as severe as my ex, or as severe as some other people, it's not easy. And I think the more that we open up and talk about these things, the more we can help one another in a healthy manner overcome all this stuff. And we don't have to deal with hearing about abuse. We don't have to worry about hearing about people taking their own lives.
I can definitely relate to pretty much every word you just said. I mean, I've spoken at great length about my previous relationship. I think I blogged about it at some points too, about being with somebody that, I suffer from depression. I've been pretty outspoken about that for a number of years now. But I was in a similar situation to you, where I was in a relationship where I thought I could fix somebody who was more broken than I was. And it's just this toxic situation where they take advantage of that, and then it just leaves you with this feeling of just being constantly lost. you know, like you're in this unwinnable battle, and it eventually just breaks you down, takes you to some pretty dark places.
100%. And something that I, as I realized in myself, and then also going through therapy and with the help of a therapist, no romantic relationship is ever going to be healthy if it is based on one person saving the other. Because if that's the rules that you establish from the get-go, if you change that dynamic in any way, you might ruin the relationship. The relationship might end because it's just like, oh, this person needs help, this person's helping, and then you add that like romantic aspect that makes things not good. Because people need help. So if you have mental health professionals, their role in the relationship that you have is, oh, you're the patient, they're the professional helping you. So having a relationship, not necessarily romantic, where like one person's helping another, is totally fine. It's just when you throw it in that romantic aspect. So the fact that your ex and you had a relationship where one of you was helping the other one, and where me and my ex, where one of us was helping the other one, if anything changed in that dynamic, it was going to throw everything for a loop. So usually when a relationship is like that, people kind of stick to a very toxic cycle because they don't want to change what's going on.
You've seen a therapist, come a long way from probably your lowest points with your anxiety. Like, what type of tools and tricks and things do you do these days, identify when you are in a spiral? How do you get yourself out of that funk?
Well, music has always been a tried and true go-to to help vent in general, ever since I picked up guitar when I was 14. But I've learned as time has gone on that, say, writing a song, I'll write something and just let like my emotions go, and just whatever comes out comes out, and then I can go back later and kind of look at the piece when I'm more calm, and I can analyze what I wrote and be like, oh, why did I feel this way? Why do I feel this way? Do I still feel this way? And that has helped me work through things and analyze and take a more logical approach to it. Speaking from a more clinical aspect, I find that journaling really, really helps, because I'm literally just writing out my thoughts. So what I normally do is I'll have, oh, this thought's bothering me. I'll write out the thought. And then I'll bullet point my train of thought in relation to that thing. So I'll be like, oh, this person said XYZ and it really upset me. And the first bullet point will be like, it upset me because of blah, 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 and I feel this way. And then my next bullet point will be like, oh, I feel this way because of what happened when I was a child. And I'll be like, oh, I just had an epiphany. And like, it'll help me like work through things that way. I also find, like, in the moment, if I find that I am being triggered with my anxiety, I will stop, I will pause, and I will do breathing exercises. So I will just take deep breaths and regulate my breathing. That usually helps me keep calm in the moment. And those are probably like the big three. So music, journaling, and breathing exercises.
So let's move on to something you're passionate about, and I think it's one of the coolest things I've seen in a while. You guys are involved in a mental health awareness show, This Is My Brave.
This Is My Brave is a nonprofit where their mission is to just encourage people to share their stories of, overcoming mental illness or living with mental illness and addiction. And it's literally what I've basically turned my personal life mission into, which is fighting the stigma against mental illness and just going, hey, we can all talk about this. And, I've been doing a lot of press recently, and the producers for the Los Angeles show, because there's like a parent company, and then they do like shows, kind of like grassroots things in different cities. So there's different chapters of This Is My Brave. So the LA producers saw a recent interview that I did, and reached out to me and invited me to audition for the LA show, which is in September. I had never, ever done anything like that before. Like, I've opened up to people. I've opened up to my therapist. I've opened up to individuals, like one-on-one. I've written songs and performed, but I've never, like, gotten up on stage and, like, spoken to an audience about what it's like living and dealing with anxiety. So I saw the opportunity to try something new, and I pushed myself outside of my comfort zone a little. And I went in for the audition, shortly after they reached out to me. And I kind of I winged the audition because I didn't really know what to do. I've never done anything like that. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to tell a story of how I got into music, and, I'll play a song. So I did that. I went in. It was a little bit longer than what they wanted, but I didn't know what I was doing, kind of, shooting from the hip, as they say. So I just went in. I told the story of, listening to, the first song that really, struck a chord with me, pun intended, and made me want to pick up guitar. And after that, I played them the very first song that I ever released 100% by myself, wrote by myself, didn't have anyone else work on it at all. And it was just this is all me. Just to kind of cement, what was going from this inspired me to pick up a guitar, and this is me having the confidence to share my art, without working with anybody else by myself. And, I left. I was I feel better about doing that. I feel more comfortable and more in control, and my anxiety is not as strong, even though it's still there. I feel like I'm more in control, but I didn't really know what to expect. I was well, if I get it, I get it. If I don't get it, I don't get it. But a few days later, they called me and said that I had passed the audition.
That's awesome. I mean, it looks like a really, really cool show. Let's say you have a time machine and you can go back and you can meet younger JD, right when the anxiety started to develop, when you started, having these thoughts. What advice would you give young JD?
I feel like that's a long list, because where we're going, we won't need roads.
God.
First of all, I'm just going to establish right now in this hypothetical situation that my time machine is in fact a DeLorean. That's so difficult. I guess I would try to establish that. That's a really difficult question. There's so much I want to say to young JD. I would probably try to give the advice to believe in yourself, to be, extremely cliche, because that's something that I've just literally always struggled with. But at the same time, it's for all the things that I have experienced and all the things that I've done, all the things that I haven't done, it's, I am who I am partially because of my experiences. So it's would I give myself advice to change that and potentially change who I am now? Would I still be me? Would I still be as big an advocate for mental health? Would I be doing something else? That is a really good question. I feel like I'm looking way too into this, more into this than might be intended. But that right there is a sign of the anxiety. That's a good point.
You've kind of gone into the whole butterfly effect thing here. The multiverse or whatever. There's a different JD on different parallel universes. One is who you are today, and another one is what if you treated your anxiety, you managed it from a way earlier age, and you didn't become this advocate. You didn't become this. One is an investment banker. Yeah. I don't know about investment banking. That would give me anxiety.
I can say that without a doubt, one thing I would tell myself that really seems insignificant, but I know for a fact would help: practice to a metronome. Because I was adamant against using a metronome, because I'm I don't need a metronome. I'm just gonna be all cool and be perfect all the time. And even though that was the opposite of how I actually felt, I was trying to overcompensate. So I would be young JD, use a metronome. All
JD,
right.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you opening up. The show in September sounds awesome. Can't wait to get there. Really, again, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, Brody, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for having, this platform for people to come in and, open up and share.
My pleasure.